As a storyteller, it's always tempting to tell your story in a slightly convoluted way in order to add an element of mystery or intrigue, like cutting a flashback up into parts to make it seem like a character is remembering bits and pieces, or cutting between past and present to foreshadow events to come. Remember though, the audience has to be able to piece it together in a succinct and easily digestible way, otherwise you're just making your story more confusing. Hello and welcome to my channel. Here I review new movies and television shows and try to release a new review every day from Monday to Friday. Today, I'm going over the film Shadow Master. It's written and directed by Puri Reginald Toe and stars D.Y. Sao, Leighton Matthews, and Brian Lay. It's an action movie that heavily incorporates elements of mystery and horror as well as the supernatural. The movie itself is a rough watch with a low production value. The dialogue is hard to hear, the acting is a little wooden, and the writing is cheesy and clunky. It fits firmly into the bad action category, and yet it has a few things to love. The action is pretty good, and the atmosphere and world they created are actually interesting. It's not enough to make the movie enjoyable, but it's not all bad. Han Vone is a former criminal looking for a job. He finds a job as a night watchman at an abandoned hospital. In exchange for food and shelter, he must watch over the building at night and protect the people living there. On his first night, a child is kidnapped, and Han vows to find the culprit and punish them. The story follows a basic strongman arriving to take on the evil organization type plot, but it does introduce some interesting supernatural elements that had a lot of potential. Hanuman is a great character, and his realm and powers were a cool addition to the story. I also liked how things played out with Hanuman and An. They didn't shy away from that ending, and I'm here for it. Having said that, the story definitely has flaws. The characters are stereotypes that talk and act like living cliches, and the story doesn't do a good job of fleshing out the emotions or explanations. A lot of the scenes feel rushed and poorly thought out, and the story has a nasty habit of not naming people or only saying their name once. The story is told through what is essentially one big flashback. Han is actually in the interrogation room telling his story to the detective for most of the film, and we're just seeing his story unfold. The movie does flashbacks within the flashback and also cuts back to the present a lot in order to drum up some mystery. It's confusing and the movie takes way too long to bring the timelines together. I had almost forgotten about the cop by the end of the film. I'm still not clear on a lot of the details of the story, and the more I think about them, the less sense they make. I'm not sure if the horsemen had powers or not, and I still have no idea what their plan actually was. Even the explanations presented in the movie are nonsensical and flimsy. You really can't think about the story too much, so it becomes a vehicle for the action. The action is well done, with a lot of choreographed scenes and a few insane martial arts stunts. The scenes are brutal, and the fighting has a nice flow to it. They tend to overuse slow motion for the really cool stuff, and there are a few moments where you can see an actor waiting for way too long to get hit, and it's obvious that it's choreography. The sets were a little basic, and I was never quite sure where we were, aside from in the hospital, but the costumes for the villains and An were creative and interesting. I had a blast looking at them. The soundtrack is filled with Hollywood boilerplate tracks, which while well used are always too loud and constantly compete with the dialogue. The volume mixing in general was awful, with most of the sounds throughout the film coming in at random volumes and the dialogue sitting meekly underneath all of it. That said, there were moments where the sound is used quite effectively to build the atmosphere up. The sounds of screams and whispers made the demonic areas feel creepy and evil. The cast does their best, but there isn't much for them to work with, and ultimately the acting ends up feeling wooden across the board. Film does a lot to overshadow what little time the actors do have to shine, and the most impressive performances end up being by the stuntmen. Stunts are really well done, and D.Y. Sao looks like he's doing most of his own stunts, if not all of them. Like the rest of the cast, he struggles with the emotional work, but his stunt work is next level, and during the scenes where he was being tortured, he gave a solid performance. Shadow Master has potential, but not enough to overcome the sound issues it suffers from. The dialogue needs to be audible. It just has to be. With a poorly executed story, dialogue that's barely audible, and super cliche when it is, and acting so wooden it could rival The Room, Shadow Master just isn't worth sitting through, even if the action is pretty good. 3 out of 10.